Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 1, which is technically 2. I know that you see of the Glad Chad podcast. My name is Jordan Pacheco.
And I'm Rodolfo Carlos.
We are so happy you're here. Welcome to a couple days after All Souls Day. You have a pretty good time, Rudy?
Bless. Yeah, it was great, man. Really enjoyed the Mass for All Saints Day, before All Souls Day. And then you and me and Jen and Ashley, we got together on All Souls Day and we went to the cemetery to pray for the poor souls in purgatory. That was like peak trad, like awesome trad friend moment.
I feel sorry because, there was a moment where we were down next to the grave of one of Jen's relatives, and we prayed a rosary, but we didn't do it in Latin. So are you even a real trad if you don't pray rosary on All Souls Day in Latin?
I don't think it counts.
We gotta go back. Remember that for the All Souls Day indulgence, which remember only applies to the poor souls in purgatory, you need to, in the first 9 days of November, visit a cemetery as well as have all the typical requisites for an indulgence, which means you have to pray for the intentions of the Pope. You have to have gone to confession and received Holy Communion. There's also a special prayer associated with All Souls Day that you should pray as well. So oftentimes you could bundle this onto one day, go to Mass, go to confession, go to a cemetery. Going with friends is a wonderful thing. We prayed a rosary, as we said before, and then you pray the special prayer, and hopefully a couple souls in purgatory will be lifted from their unfortunate torments. And now you have intercessors in heaven, which is the best place to have an intercessor. Better than a courtroom even, believe it or not. But I wouldn't know anything about that.
It's kind of like, pardon if it's a bad expression, but it's almost like an insurance policy. You're praying for some souls in purgatory, and then they're going to pray for you.
What is that? Is that Martin Luther coming to shut us down?
Hey, did you hear that hammer at the door?
That
sounded like 99 Theses?
What was that thing that 95 Theses?
Whatever.
No, he had
Who
99
cares?
Theses, but an indulgence ain't one. Catholics do not buy indulgences, by the way.
No.
When you never have. I mean, I can't find it. What the heck?
No,
Come on, Martin
I've
Luther.
never personally purchased one.
Oh, I mean, I've secretly purchased a front
I've never
one.
been offered an opportunity to purchase
Would
one.
you like to buy one now?
How much is it?
$100.
I don't know, man. I'm kind of on a budget.
We got budget indulgences. Ooh,
yeah, that was a great time. Really, really enjoyed that. And then also we went to the International Life Services Gala.
Yeah.
That was the next day, right?
That was absolutely right.
Sunday night.
So we got to go to this gala kind of near the Rose Bowl, actually, in Pasadena, and it was for the International Life Services, and they, for ever since even before Roe v. Wade, have been fighting the pro-life fight. They've opened up countless pregnancy centers. In fact, their pregnancy centers outnumber the amount of abortion facilities there are in the States. Deo gratias. And on top of that, so many of their pregnancy centers aren't just for counseling and for healing and for support. In the conventional way, they're also medical facilities in their own rights, which means that they can do ultrasounds, and they have ultrasounds in plenty of these places. So we got to meet a lot of the movers and shakers of that wonderful organization.
Yep. We also got to hear a keynote talk by Father Frank Pavone. Got to speak with him after. It was really edifying, and gave us a couple of speaking points. Whenever you get put on the spot trying to be an apologist against abortion, and gave us some really awesome advice, telling us, the burden of proof isn't on us, it's on them. They have to explain to us how, abortion, which is often coined as a medical procedure, is, how is that a medical procedure? It's not.
It's not. What's funny is that the point of a medical procedure is to regulate the body back to health, essentially. There is a problem in the body that's irregular, and whatever the medical procedure is to get it healthy again. Well, pregnancy is a healthy function of a perfectly functioning womb in a woman.
Yep.
So there's no parasite, there's no whatever they say, the horrible phrases that they have for babies inside the womb. And now what we also learned, of course, is that because of this heavy push that the mask has come off, that now we have people openly campaigning for infanticide in this country. And it's always been infanticide, of course, but now we're talking about even babies who are born due to a failed abortion are not protected, that they are still killed in countless of these facilities. And we're seeing that with a lot of expose videos that are coming out. We have a huge one in California happening right now.
Delighten case?
Something like that, yeah. So please keep that in your prayers. Of course, you should know that it was a very hopeful event, though. One thing that Father made very clear is that we are winning, that slowly and steadily facilities are closing, and also that our blood is up. And it's okay to get angry as long as that anger is to a justifiable point, and also that it calls us to a greater, holier action. In this case, it is perfectly acceptable to be upset about abortion. It is the worst atrocity I can think of the modern era. We are literally sacrificing millions of children to Baal.
Yes.
And as a result, we need to take that faith that Holy Mother Church has instilled in all of us, that desire to know that every single child is precious, no matter what circumstance he's in. And also, what was interesting too, and what was good too about talking about this is it's not just about the children inside the womb and outside the womb, but how do we start the process of healing and turning a legitimate culture of life for the mothers too, who a lot of times, unfortunately, have their heads filled with abortion being a viable option because they want to be safe, legal, and rare.
Or even the only option, really. The only option that they have. And they buy into it, and then they have to live with years of regret.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you hear so often now there's a whole movement about it called Shout Your Abortion. I don't think genuinely people feel good about that.
Yeah.
I think it's a horrible thing that people are forced into. And it's awesome that this organization, International Life Services, they also have services for women who have suffered an abortion, or, people around them, the family, the husband or the boyfriend or whatever,
that's right.
People who push the woman into the abortion, even, they have resources for that. So that was incredible to hear. And it refocuses you specifically in the reality that we are living in the Church Militant.
That's right.
We are the Church Militant. It's not just a website. We love Church Militant, by the way.
Yeah.
Michael Voris,
get him.
And everybody part of that team. But we are part of this Church Militant. And what that means is we're here on earth, and we're striving. We are working towards our salvation. We're trying to get to heaven. It's not a guarantee. We're doing everything we can. And so this episode, we wanted to talk about, men and women who are so inspiring to us, the saints, or maybe they're not saints. I actually picked somebody who's not a saint yet. But I imagine in the next 100, maybe 200 years, this man is going to be recognized.
God willing, less.
Yeah. These people, they inspire us. They put a fire in us. I spoke of fire the last episode. But these people, they really refocus you. And they give you a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
They give you a purpose, and they remind you that you're fighting for all kinds of things. You're fighting for the salvation of your soul, the salvation of the souls of those people around you, the culture, and everything.
What's funny is I think about when we hear the term Church Militant, which is something that as a traditionalist, you rediscover a lot of times, that there is the Church Militant, that's us on earth. There is the Church Suffering, which is the souls in purgatory. And there's the Church Triumphant, which is our brothers and sisters in the glory of God in heaven. And when it comes to the Church Militant, I'm reminded of a G.K. Chesterton article, which spoke of Gothic architecture. And he's looking up at this Gothic cathedral. And anyone who sees a Gothic cathedral, it's a very stark, kind of ugly looking thing. Imposing is a very good word. And what he realized, and what he kind of comes to the conclusion, is that, these sharp, jagged edges, why don't they but represent swords and spears of a bristling army on the march? And that's what we as a Church Militant are called to be. At confirmation, we are called forth to be soldiers of Christ. And in these days especially, that is what we're doing. So when we read the lives of the saints, or we see the heroic witness of so many good Catholic men and women nowadays, and there's a lot of them to be had, by the way, it's not just all darkness out on the horizon, we can really see what God is calling us to do for Holy Mother Church. So we picked a few examples of holy men and women who are fighting the good fight, or have fought the good fight in their lives in those dark times, even when it seemed like the gates of hell was going to prevail against the church. But of course, we know of Christ's great promise that that's never going to happen. So I went a little classic, with my heroic saint. My current patron saint is Sir Thomas More. I have a very high sort of affection and admiration for the man and his witness, even unto death, for the sake of the church. So Thomas More reached the highest dregs of English society that you could reach at his time, second to the king. He was Lord Chancellor of England. Essentially, he was the prime minister, if you will. He was a crack lawyer, and he was also an extremely devout Catholic. He was a Catholic that believed that the expression of the law, objectively given by God, was made manifest in the subjective laws that humans made. So Sir Thomas More's life was about order and making sure that the balances which God had created stayed in effect. This, of course, naturally extended to marital law. And we all know the story with Henry VIII and his many wives, at the time his second wife. Sir Thomas More refused the marriage. And this was something that was absurd to think about, because all the nobles supported Henry's quote unquote divorce and remarriage. Remember, the Pope would not annul it. Secondly, a lot of the bishops, many of the bishops, in fact, there was only a couple of bishops who refused the king's marriage as well. Essentially, the church in England went along with it. They said, you're absolutely right. The Pope doesn't know what he's talking about. We're going to go along with the king. And Sir Thomas More was silent. And it's very funny how in the modern church now, we talk about silence as a weapon. It's being reintroduced, I think, quite negatively. But there is actually a very, very key point of silence in the history of the church, which should be talked about. And Sir Thomas More, understanding how the law, which was being ripped apart in real time in front of him, that this was the last kind of bastion of defense. What's funny also is that we realize with Sir Thomas More that silence, especially in the history of the Catholic Church, isn't actually silent. His silence spoke volumes more than anything else that he could have done. And it was the convictions to Holy Mother Church, the fact that Holy Mother Church believed that marriage was something that could not be dissolved, no matter if you were a king or if you were the poorest person in the realm. He stuck to it. He understood that once you let even one of these things slip, that the whole house of cards comes tumbling down, which unfortunately we have seen, I would say, in the modern Church of England now. So Sir Thomas More was martyred for it. He refused the king. They accused him of treason, which was laughable. And his last words was, I am the king's humble and loyal servant, but God's first.
Wow.
And that was it. And so for me, Sir Thomas More, especially in these times, is such a hero, because he, as far as anyone can tell, he did not receive the beatific vision on earth. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a mystic. He didn't know any mystics. He was a good Orthodox Catholic, a great Orthodox Catholic. He was generous. He was firm in his faith. His household was a model for plenty of other people, both in learning and in the reverence to the faith.
He was convicted.
Convicted.
Yeah.
That's absolutely the right kind of word. And that conviction did not waver, even when he lost his position, he lost his household. He was locked in the Tower of London for a very long time. He couldn't see his family.
It sounds like Job.
Yeah.
That's
like absolutely right.
Story, yeah.
And at the same time, remember, just like with Job, the world which is supposed to be ordered and righted that he was a part of came crashing down in front of him. All of a sudden, Catholicism wasn't Catholicism. The same churches and cathedrals that he grew up in and loved so much were Anglican, weren't Catholic anymore. And it seemed like what was the Catholic Church was so far away. So I think Thomas More is a great witness of knowing that even when it seems like it's darkest, even when it seems like, we're talking again, of course, about idols in the Vatican nowadays. We're talking about the great sex abuse crises in the church. We're talking about the summer of shame. We're talking about the closure of schools and parishes and the retiring of priests and so many bad things. It may seem like the gates of hell are going to prevail against the church. But as long as you keep that internal island which God has placed inside you of the faith, then that faith which can move mountains can also sometimes be the mountain. And it doesn't change your disposition.
I imagine at the time that he was experiencing all of this, it really did seem like everything was going upside down. Mm-hmm. It reminds me really of what we're experiencing right now. And I can't help but feel that, things don't actually, like, we're not too far off. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but we're not too different.
Yeah.
No. It's almost like a cyclical kind of thing that the church goes through constantly. Mm-hmm. It renews itself. Perhaps there's some sort of divine providence in the fact that this happens every couple hundred years, where the church is tested, and then the faithful continue and they get stronger, and then there may be some complacency, and then it goes through the cycle.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know. I mean, that's just speculation, but
it's true. Actually, I mean, we have to remember this. So say someone like St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi didn't just pop up out of the blue in the Middle Ages one day. Mm-hmm. Look what the Vatican had gone through. The pornocracy, which, to quote the great Charles Coulomb, was essentially the papacy and the cardinalate being run by Roman sluts.
Wow.
That's exactly right. And it's true. We had generations even of popes being run by courtesans in the Roman ring. And so this, of course, is accompanying the great laxity of the clergy at the time as well. I mean, they were...
Sound familiar?
That's exactly right. And the laity, I mean, that says nothing of the laity. And so from that, however, came the resurgence of orthodoxy and the beauty of God's grace with the likes of St. Francis of Assisi. In Sir Thomas More's time, we had the Protestant Reformation. In fact, More wrote against Martin Luther. They kind of indirectly jabbed at each other quite a bit, very meanly, by the way, very cleverly in that high Elizabethan kind of writing. But look what happened from the Reformation. The fact of the matter is that, again, the clergy was extremely lax. The laity was extremely lax. And from there, we have Trent, we have St. Pius V, we have Lepanto. We had the standardization, the organization, and the great beauty of, for instance, the Tridentine Mass that we celebrate comes from that great upheaval. I think it's the same nowadays. I think there was like these kind of 500-year cyclical things that the church goes through. Right now, we live in a world where we know that the clergy, a lot of them are obviously very lax and are not living according to the tenets of God's has instilled for us. A lot of them are trying to change the faith even. That says volumes about the laity, because it's not like clergy just pop up out of the ground. How many of us are complicit in mortal sin? How many of us are complacent in mortal sin? How many of us reject the teachings of the church no matter what, because it doesn't really matter? And yeah, so it's not surprising that this happens. But what's nice also is that we can see, I'm sure as Rudy will talk about, that there are a lot of figures on the horizon and a return on the horizon for people who understand that Catholicism is so rich and beautiful, and it can stand against even the most turbulent of times in the world.
You know who spoke about this in one of his, I think it was a retreat that he was giving. Venerable Fulton Sheen was talking about, this is a great video, by the way, if you want to look it up. I believe there's a video on YouTube called The Fourth Great Crisis in the Church, and he talks about the cyclical nature of the rise and fall of the church. Every 500 years, like you mentioned, it seems to be like there's a massive upheaval and then a period of orthodoxy, a period of growth. But I think, especially in those times, we're being called to purify ourselves even more as laity, because we don't, the church is a monarchy, a divinely appointed monarchy.
Oh, yeah.
And there's only so much that we can do as laity. I mean, we can't really affect too much. We can with prayer, and we can also affect how we build our families, for example. We have to purify ourselves. We have to work for our salvation and return to traditional forms of piety and really bolster our prayer life. That's how we can affect change. But yeah, I think we are in a period of, I don't know. I tend to think that we're in a period of restoration. I think we're moving towards it now.
I think we just got it.
Yeah, like it's almost like we were on the fence and now, or maybe for a better visual, we were at the epiclesis of the mountain, we were at the crest, and now it's all downhill from here. And not in a bad way, but like in an easy sort of, not maybe not an easy way, but now,
the right way.
The right way.
Yeah. So do you see, so in terms of kind of us being here in the restoration phase, hopefully, because it is, last year was 100 years since Fatima, which is why I think people began to realize that the summer of shame was quite providential, that God is using our sin to burn away the iniquities surrounding the faith or people of the faith
or maybe to expose it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Shine some light on it.
Yeah. So who do you see? Who do you got? What would you say is kind of the rising stars that we can kind of look to?
I think for me, I had to, I thought, because when we talked about brainstorming about this episode, I started looking in the past, and certainly like if I was to pick somebody in the past, it would be Archbishop Sheen.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
But I decided I wanted to pick somebody who's still alive today and who had a big part in my, getting serious about my faith. It was Bishop Schneider.
Oh, yeah.
Bishop Athanasius Schneider.
God bless him.
And you might be hearing a lot more about him nowadays because he is a maverick. He is a spiritual maverick.
Yes.
And, one of the famous things that, he might be known for recently is that there's a document that was created by Pope Francis called the Abu Dhabi document, and in which there was an ambiguous sort of phrase, kind of putting all religions on the same level. And
God willing, the plurality of religions.
That's exactly what was in question in this document. It was written that God wills the diversity and plurality of religions. And Bishop Schneider, who's like, I keep saying it, but he's just a maverick. He asked for clarification on this, and actually, spoke to the Pope about it. And the Pope, he realized that maybe he had said something ambiguous, and he corrected it. Unfortunately, he didn't correct it in the final document. He just
made a clarification verbally.
Yeah. But Bishop Schneider for me is an incredible role model. I think for many people too. I first heard about him 2 years ago. It was 2017. And I ran into a video. This is another good video resource if you want to hear how he speaks and what he speaks about. He did an interview with, I can't remember the show, but it was on EWTN. So if you go onto YouTube and you type in Bishop Athanasius Schneider, EWTN, the video will come up. And in this video, he was talking about one of the running themes of the interview was communion, Holy Communion, the Eucharist, our blessed Lord. We receive him every Sunday in every Mass. And he was talking about communion in the hand. It was like a common theme. And he made this amazing example of this kind of interreligious dialogue that he had. If you're reading his book, also, he has a book that he just released. It's kind of like an interview format as well, called Christus Vincit. He was talking about how he was in this interreligious dialogue. I think it must have been in Kazakhstan. He's the auxiliary bishop of Kazakhstan. And he was talking about this Muslim imam who, to him, really to Muslims, to touch the Quran is something sacred.
Yeah.
It's something very, very important to them. And so what happened is at this conference, Protestant, he touched the Quran without washing his hands. And to that imam, it was a blasphemy. It was a very serious thing. And Bishop Schneider said it injured him in his heart. Not Bishop Schneider, but for the imam, it was an injury to his heart. And he made this awesome example of he was thinking, well, what if he put this imam in one of the masses and he got to see our blessed Lord being handed out by, I don't know, Susan in her grandma sweater,
in her pantsuit,
and people are receiving our blessed Lord in their hands, and and what would he say?
Yeah.
And he would ask, well, what is this thing? What is this white cake that you're passing out? And we would say, oh, well, that's our blessed Lord. And he says, oh, symbolically. He says, no, this is substantially our Lord. This is God. And he would say, this is how you treat your Lord? And I think when I heard that 2 years ago, I wasn't receiving in the hand. I was receiving in the mouth at the time. But it made so much sense to me that I wanted to shake the parish and tell them, like, guys, listen, this is a perfect example of why we should do this. We don't have consecrated hands. We we don't have anything. We're not priests. We don't deserve to touch our blessed Lord. When we receive our blessed Lord from the hands of the priest, that's something completely different.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
But we as lay people, we shouldn't be touching him. It's a travesty, you know. And that was the first thing that I heard from Bishop Schneider. That's what put him on my radar. It's funny. I brought it up to a friend. And I said, hey, have you heard of Bishop Schneider? And he's like, oh, he sounds like, you know, a Sith, like a Star Wars evil guy, you know? I think nowadays for modernists, you know, they kind of see him as a bad guy.
Oh, he's a hammer of heretics, all right.
Oh, yeah, he's a hammer for sure. But, you know, what strikes me the most about him, what is most inspiring about him is his character. He's not the kind of guy that is calling these things out, you know, to bring glory to himself or to get a camera on him or anything. He is doing everything that he does out of love for our blessed Lord and for his church. So much so that, you know, he's on the radar of Pope Francis, of, you know, all kinds of powerful cardinals and bishops. And people kind of label him as if he is some sort of enemy of the church, but in reality, he's not. He's a very holy man. So much so that in a recent interview with Michael Matt of The Remnant, you know, he was talking about how we really, really need to pray for the salvation of the soul of our Pope Francis. And he was saying that when we have that filial piety, that filial charity for the Holy Father and faithfulness to him, despite whatever, I mean, we've seen, you know, the idols, he calls them Pachamamas. We've seen all kinds of ambiguous, confusing things from our pontiff. It doesn't make him any less the pontiff.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And so he's uniting all of us and saying, look, yes, these things are taking place, but we need to pray out of charity, because when we do that, we are praying for the soul and the conversion of our Holy Father. And he mentions, you know, kind of like the last things. He says, you know, at the end of his life, we're all going to have to do this. We're going to have to be in front of the divine judge. And perhaps in the last moments, you know, when he's there, he's gonna know that the people, the little ones that he may have condemned as rigids, that we really were his best friends praying for him.
That's
you know,
right.
Praying for the best for him, you know. So Bishop Schneider is just a hero for me. I really recommend his book, and he has a fantastic story. I mean, his whole life is just a really fantastic story. You know, he grew up in kind of like the German side of Russia.
Okay.
They had a little settlement there, and he talks about how his family emigrated there and his life that he experienced through communism, and, you know, the hardships that his family and himself experienced being under such a brutal regime that's so hostile to religion.
It's atheistic to the core.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's just he has an interesting story, and I really value him and see him as a spiritual hero of mine. But, you know, I don't want to, because I don't know what our demographic is so far, but, you know, I don't want it to be, you know, maybe there's a couple women listening and you're like, well, what about us? You know, I don't want you to feel left out or anything, because the call to virtue is not just for men, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Some women are called to it. So much so that, you know, Ashley and I, when we first started dating, we started thinking about, oh, you know, we had like a really nice conversation. We're like, oh, what would we call our children? You know.
Oh, the best conversation.
Yeah, I love that. It's great. And we came up with for a girl's name, we wanted to name her Grace, which eventually it evolved into something else, because we were thinking, oh, well, Grace is a good first name, but might be a better middle name. So then we started looking at saints, right? And we settled on Apollina, Saint Apollina, an incredible saint.
Yeah.
She was a virgin martyr. And she was, you know, she was down. She was just, she would not let her faith be trampled upon. And she, I think, is another great example. She was asked to apostatize, and, you know, they gave her a choice. And she said no, and they kicked her teeth out.
They kicked her teeth
They
out.
kicked her teeth out. And they asked her again, will you apostatize? Will you reject? Will you renounce Christ? And she said no. And they said, if you don't do this, we're going to throw you on the pyre and you're gonna die. And she just jumped into the fire on her own. She jumped into the fire so that she didn't have to renounce our blessed Lord Jesus Christ.
God be praised.
Exactly.
Jeez,
it's just,
that's earning the martyr's crown.
Yeah, maybe we're not being called to be martyrs, or there's a couple different kinds of martyrs, right? I mean,
that's true.
White martyrs,
red martyrs.
Maybe we're not
martyrs
called
with
to
polka dot stripes.
Yeah, maybe we're not called to the red martyrship.
Oh, if God is merciful, please no. And that's another thing too, real quick, is that Sir Thomas More, to go back to him, was also one of those who martyrdom was not. He thought he could, for a time, he thought he could ride the storm because law and order is breaking around, you know? So it's not like when God allows these situations for us to happen where we have to defend the faith, the fact of the matter is we have to be willing to have all the options on the table, even if we don't think an option is distant going to happen. I remember you telling me St. Apollina's story a little earlier. That's wonderful. That is, for your daughter, that's going to be an absolute treasure of a namesake.
Yeah, I hope so.
And as far as to your point on Bishop Athanasius Schneider, I don't want to do a trad flex on you, but the first time I saw him was actually a high mass.
What?
A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago,
that hurts.
at St. Victor's. He came and could celebrate it with our current priests at St. Vitus.
Wow. So solemn high mass.
A solemn high mass. Okay. I have a good video of his. I didn't know who he was, by the way, but I knew that I could feel that holiness. And that's a very important quality, because when you find a man who's dedicated to God, and as you said, he's a very humble man. He's very non nobis domine, not to me, Lord, but to you the glory. And I haven't read his book yet, but in all the talks I've seen of his online, that's very much the case. There's something really exciting about the fact that our heroes of the faith and those most prominent are those who aren't drawing attention to themselves, but are always pointing to God. Fulton J. Sheen was like that.
Yes.
Through his ministry. And that's a guy who could have taken all that power and run with it. But constantly through all the various programs that he did, through his prolific writings, I'm reading The World's First Love right now, which is about the Virgin Mary. And what's lovely about that is that you can't read a book by Fulton Sheen without hearing his voice.
Yeah, that's true.
It's impossible, which is good. But it's
always read it in his voice.
And it's always to God and to Our Lady, which is great. So this is a time, again, friends, that even if it seems dark and there's not a lot of allies, there are actually a lot of allies. And one thing that's really nice about the internet space, the digital space, where for natural reasons this lives on, because we're not projecting it through a megaphone out in Los Angeles. We've already been kicked out from the square for doing that. Is that we are discovering kind of new communities of traditionalists and Catholics who want to rediscover orthodoxy and heroic virtue. And it starts with us as a laity. There's a call to holiness that the laity needs to answer. And the fact of the matter is that in these days especially, we have slacked in our duties to God. We have slacked in our prayer life. We have slacked in our mass intentions. We've slacked in our diligence and duties to our families, to what God has given us in our lives. And now there's that great call back. The Church Militant is on the march. And it's time to join this soft crusade to give all the glory back to God again, because we have a lot to make up for. But hopefully things like this, maybe a revamp in your own spiritual lives, moving again to orthodox and tradition and away from the temptations and pleasures of the world, even those pleasures of the world that are inside the church now, is all very, very good things to show that Holy Mother Church is here, that Our Lady and our Lord are defending her at real time. And it's time for us now to pick up the slack and join the church triumphant someday if we can run the foot race here.
Yes. That reminds me of a saying. I can't remember who said it though. But it's this idea that virtue is not attractive on its own. I think we have to have it modeled for us in order for us to be attracted to it and to desire it, to desire virtue, right? And what happens is when you start running the race and you're living a more virtuous life, you're praying, you're firing on all cylinders, you're inspired, you're going to inspire all kinds of other people too. And I think this is how we can start to renew the church a little bit. It starts with us.
Yeah.
There's only so much we can do. I mean, like I mentioned before, we're in a monarchy.
Thank God for it too.
Yeah, it's a monarchy that was established by God.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't just say, oh, well, Francis isn't our pope. We can't just pick our pope or whatever. We have to kind of go along with the foundations that have been given to us,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when we take virtue and we take it, full throttle, we're going to bring other people with us.
That's true.
And we're going to renew the church.
And as we talked about with last episode with the growth of fraternity parishes
Mm-hmm.
and the restoration
Mm-hmm.
of the traditional mass and orthodoxy, it's that modeled virtue that we see first. The fact of the matter is that for a lot of us, we might have known about the Latin Mass, we might know about the saints, but until you see it tangibly witnessed, until you can put a face to it, until you can put a smell to it, until you can put a sound to it, it just stays in the ether. And again, what's really lovely about this restoration is how we are firing on all cylinders now. We can go on YouTube and we can see Athanasius Schneider, Bishop Auxiliary of Kazakhstan, giving an interview, and we can say, I'm interested in what he's talking about. Let's read his book. Let's see what he's about more. I'd never been to Latin Mass till I was a high schooler,
Mm-hmm.
but I know the images of it. I'd known the music about it. I'd seen images on YouTube. In fact, if you type in, even now, listener, if you type in Holy Mass on Google, about a third, maybe even half, but I think a third concretely of all the images you're going to see
The Tridentine Mass.
is the Tridentine Mass.
Mm-hmm.
The priest is facing away from the people in that wonderful elevation of the host as it becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ.
What's really cool is when you have that model, in the priest.
Mm-hmm.
You meet a holy priest and he's living his life for God, and he's doing everything that he can, not to be like, Father Jim Bob, who's your pal, like, hey, let's talk about whatever.
Father J.
No, he is an example for you.
Mm-hmm.
He's living out chastity. He's living out virtue.
J.
He's praying every day.
Mm-hmm.
He's praying for you, for everybody, And when you see that modeled in a holy priest, oh man, that is so inspiring.
That's what really does it. And I've been very blessed because growing up, I've had some very, very good holy
Mm-hmm.
priests to look up to.
Me too.
Particularly in my very formative high school years when it started. And that now that we're here at St. Vitus, our priests are wonderful and an absolute model of the kind of men that I want to be. And aside from that, of course, is even in the family life, it starts with the home life, of course. It starts with your own disposition. And I saw it with my father, with my grandfather coming up, the kind of man that I was called to be, the prayer life set forth by my father and grandfathers, the sort of virtues that they instilled inside me, the ones that I'm trying to gain every time, asking the grace of God. But it's wonderful when you really see that Catholic community, that Catholic culture starting to reshape, when people just naturally, it's a natural disposition with the grace that God has given them to live out the virtues, to live out their heroic identity as Catholics.
Yeah, and you and I are we're getting ready to go into the vocation of marriage.
Yeah, that's right.
Not together.
Not together. That'd be
not you and me.
The church doesn't allow that. Thank God.
Sorry, Slim Jim.
Sorry, Slim Jim. Ooh.
Well, we're moving towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is we have to build a domestic church within our home.
That's right.
We got to model it in our home, and we're a building block.
Mm-hmm.
We're a building block of the church, the family. Talked a little bit about that in the last episode. Finding the families at our traditional parish.
Yeah. Well, that was an absolute wonderful glad trad little segment, wasn't it, Rudy?
That was
I think people are feeling really happy.
I feel good.
I feel good, actually.
But hold on, I actually feel.
What's wrong?
I feel a little.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what's it? Is it what I think it is? Angry. Surge madness.
This doesn't feel good.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. It's now time for the moment you've been waiting for, the Mad Trad Podcast.
Well, you know what? I'm actually really pissed off. I'm legitimately pissed because I got a letter in the mail from the Archdiocese,
Was it a Dear John?
It's a
Dear Rudy.
Dear Mr. Carlos.
Oh, Mr. Carlos is your father.
And you already know you're gonna get, a letter asking for money.
How much do they want?
They want $500 million.
No.
Yes, $500 million.
Come on.
Right. And so what really ticks me off about this is I look at the number that they want, and then I think immediately to the amount of money that's been paid out.
Oh, for like the sex abuse.
Yes.
Oh,
especially just in our archdiocese.
Oh my gosh.
It's a ridiculous number. I mean, just to give you an idea of what's going on here. In 2007, there was a $660 million payout.
$660 million.
660. 2014, $13 million. And just last year, there was the largest payout in history, $8 million.
Just one
Just
person?
to one case.
Oh no.
Just to one
for the
case.
Barajas thing.
Yeah.
To remind everybody, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles is the largest diocese in the United States, which means that these payouts are extremely serious. $660 million. So how much is the Archdiocese asking for again?
$500 million.
$500 million.
So I get upset when I see stuff like that, because it's like, all of that money that you paid out for abuse, for, just absolute terrible, terrible things, that should never have happened.
Yeah.
When you ask for that much money and you compare it to all of that, it's like, I can't do it. I'm sorry, I can't.
And this isn't stuff that's happened in the past. We're not talking about things that happened in the 90s or the 80s.
No,
this is recent. Something ongoing. I gotta tell you that one of the most frustrating things, well, for obvious reasons, is this. So the fact of the matter is that St. Vitus was the first church opened in a very long time. I remember that very distinctly. Churches are closing across the nation, friends. And it's churches and it's schools, and some reasons I think are very positive. The fact of the matter is that we're removing bad clergy ever since the Pennsylvania grand jury is a wonderful, good thing. The fact of the matter, however, is that there's a bloodletting and a retribution coming, and I think that it is, of course, inspired because God is punishing us properly for the laxity that we've allowed this sin to creep into the church. Something interesting to think about is this. I think it's just a diocese. The Diocese of Albany is going bankrupt because of the sex abuse crisis, because we didn't fix this when we had the opportunity to fix this. The Diocese of Santa Fe, where a lot of my family lives because they're New Mexican, is bankrupt because of the same thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the financial bottom line of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles is, and I'm a little scared to think about that. But the fact of the matter is that we've had a tremendous payout, and it's only going to get worse. These things that we see east, where they've lifted the statute of limitations in New York for victims of priestly and clergy abuse, is something that's going to roll over the entire country. And I think rightly so, by the way. But the bigger point is this. You do have an obligation to support your church.
Right, the tithe.
The tithe, absolutely right. You also have an obligation as a Catholic, however, to make sure that you know that your money is being used for the greater good of God. And just giving your money willy-nilly to the Renewing God's Gift campaign, whatever the heck it's called, for the Archdiocese that we see annually, right?
It seems to always have renew in it.
Always renew.
Something renewal.
The worst part is so I come from Colorado, and I do remember this, my podunk little parish, Our Lady of the Visitation, which I love, by the way. But it's very, very, very boomer, shall we say. But whenever it came to the Returning God's Gift campaign, they would always wheel out the TV.
Yikes.
In the middle of the homily, and
cringe.
we'd watch. Oh man, can you imagine that? Can you imagine if that happened at a traditional mass?
Oh, it's bad.
I'd probably leave. So yeah, listen, there are plenty of ways to support your church and even the greater Catholic communities. There are countless religious organizations, including the fraternity, including different religious orders, who are very, very good about using your money properly, that you can build up with the glory of God without worrying about your money going towards things that really should have been solved by the people who are above us.
In the same letter, it said that they had already accomplished 60% of their goal.
Well, they've already, so that's what?
So they've already
acquired,
they've already acquired 60% of that $500 million that they're asking for.
Ooh.
And what's really annoying and pisses me off is that the people that have given the money, they've probably given it with good intention.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But what they don't know is that, this money somehow gets funneled to different parishes. And you can never, here's the thing, like you can never know, because it's always at the discretion of a particular priest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe Father Jim Bob gets a sizable portion, and you can kiss it goodbye.
Yeah.
Like that money is not going to go anywhere responsible. It's gonna be spent frivolously.
Or by his boyfriend spent frivolously.
Well, that's the thing. And it's just very annoying to me that like people give nowadays and they don't know what they're giving to.
Yeah.
They have, they just, oh yeah, here's my wallet, take it. And it's like, no, you got to know what you're giving to. You got to know where your money's going,
Mm-hmm.
and you gotta tithe responsibly.
That's right. Tithe responsibly. And it's unfortunate because I understand, of course, that as a Roman Catholic, we want to live in a world. And I think for a second, there was a world where if I give my money to the church, it's going to be used for the purposes of the church properly. Our grandparents didn't have to worry about a clergy sex abuse crisis like we're worrying about.
Mm-hmm.
Although the seeds were being sowed at that time, unfortunately. For every one Catholic that's coming into the church, 6 are leaving. And by the way, those ones who are leaving do it at the college level. I want to be able to give my money to my church and knowing that it's being used for God's purposes,
Mm-hmm.
not for the purpose of covering up, because it is a legitimate cover-up happening across all sorts of dioceses. If I send my children to a Catholic school, I want them to get an authentic, traditional Catholic education.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to just send them willy-nilly because, it had the word Catholic in it. Nowadays, you can't be ignorant on this sort of thing. We are at war, as we have stressed time and time again. That means with your money, that means with your prayers, that means with your time, that means with your focus. And that also means that you need to make sure that every single cent you're getting and going is going to the right kinds of channels. So until the Archdiocese, for me, puts better measures in place and really proves that they're moving for an authentic Catholic experience, until the Archdiocese burns down the religious education conference,
Yikes, dude.
then I give my money directly to the Fraternity of St. Peter.
Or if
Or
anything,
anything.
sponsor a seminarian or something.
Easy important, yeah. There are plenty of religious orders. The Norbertines here in Southern California are wonderful.
You will know them by their fruit. If you
Yes.
see something, if you see a community that's thriving, if you see a priest that's doing well, go to him,
Mm-hmm.
go to that community and ask them, how can I help you?
That's true.
Give your money where it's going to be used properly.
Something to be very mindful of is if you're going to withdraw your funds from diocesan pledges or maybe a parish's money, to be very, very clear about why you're doing it. Because we want to also instill that there is a rising surge of people who are very aware of what's going on and they reject it. So maybe you peg a letter to the Archbishop. Maybe you write your priest. Maybe you be very clear why you're withdrawing money from a particular organization that you thought was very Catholic, then turned out was taking money from the Ford Foundation or something. And you say, hey, listen, sit on. So to wrap down, it's just very important to know that, listen, as Catholics, we have this sort of obligation. We have to be very conscious of everything that goes on in the church. And remember, we are trying to renew the church, or legitimately renew the church,
Yes.
not just the mamby-pamby way that we see in these diocesan letters.
Yeah, not just the feel good kind of, oh, here's a letter, here's a video of all these kids,
That's
having
right.
a good time, painting a picture.
I'm not
help the
Catholic,
kids.
but thank you for helping me and my atheist parents get a transgender operation.
Yikes.
We're only a year away. I know. I'm cutting it.
I don't know.
Too far.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you.
And,
Second episode. All right.
Yeah, I hope we're not turning you off with this mad trad stuff. This is ultimately a glad trad podcast.
We are really glad, as you can tell. I mean, there is a lot of great things that are happening inside the church. We just have to be mindful of cleaning everything up too.
Yes.
At the same time. But listen, the slogan of the Glad Trad podcast, at this time at least, is Risus et Bellum. Which you know what that is? Trademark. Trademark, yeah. Hashtag Risus et Bellum. That means laughter and war, by the way. And that's exactly how we as a Church Militant need to go forward. We are God's army, or at least we're attempting to be God's army on earth a little bit. It's an exciting time, honestly. And with all the good things that are happening, we have to be able to smile. at the grace which God has given us, at the joy which should be in our hearts as traditionalists. And also we have to gird our loins a little bit and fight like a man.
Smile while you unsheath your spiritual weapon, the rosary.
Mm-hmm. That'll terrify the devil more than anything, certainly.
And keep that thing on you.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Remember, please, 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 the daily rosary, all the prayers, supplication, penance, confession, Eucharist, go to Mass as often as possible, of course. Really get the graces of God that he is giving upon the world, washing over your own soul.
Yes, especially go to Mass. Always go to Mass.
Go to Mass. No more excuses. I see you in the back there. Stop it.
Hey, and if you would like to come and visit us at St. Vitus, we extend an invitation.
Yes.
And we would love to see you there.
Yes, I can even give you the Mass times. We have a 7:30 low Mass. That means there's no singing. A 9 o'clock high Mass.
Which is my favorite.
Do that one. An 11 o'clock high Mass, which is also very good. And a 5 o'clock low Mass. So there, now you have really no excuses. We also have weekdays, but you can go to fssp.la. That's the website, and you can see exactly when the Mass times are. And remember, there's confession half an hour before every single Mass. That's wonderful. You have no excuse. You don't need to stand in that line that's 12 people long on a Saturday while all the Susans go before you.
You know what the best part of it is, though?
What
Even
is it?
if there's 12 people ahead of you, the cool thing is that it's always very clear-cut, straight shooter stuff. All right. There's 12 people ahead of you, but they're going through the number, the circumstance, and they're going in there and they're coming out real quick.
We're gonna have to do a little podcast on the tenets of what makes a good and proper confession.
Yes, absolutely.
So that you can please God and not piss off your neighbor.
And save your soul.
And save your soul, which is most important. All right, everybody. Well, God bless you and Mary keep you from here at the Glad Trad Podcast. We will see you guys later.
Goodbye.
Adios.